Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. Helen, it is lovely to have you here today.
Thank you.
And we are going to talk about your play that was put on by Milim called 1942, Can We Escape from the Pletzl Paris? So please, can you, just in a nutshell, tell me what the play is about?
So I was inspired, many years ago, when I heard the story of a survivor, a child survivor, who at the age of 6 was in the middle of the worst calamity in Paris. It's bad today, but in those days it was just the German invasion, the French police collaboration, and the roundup of the Jews called the Raflé. And she's 6 years old, being arrested with her parents, and in the middle of all this confusion, a lady comes, a hand comes. She gets hold of the little girl's arm. "What are you doing here? Come home for your dinner right now." And she took the little girl into her accommodation, to her apartment, and hid her under the tablecloth. Well, that blows me away and blew me away. And it just set me on a journey. If I hear somebody really inspiring, I'd like to know more. And this led to a massive search for information in Israel, on the internet, in France, here, even in America. And all this information came together. And people said, "Well, what are you going to do with it?" And I thought, a long poem, that's what it'll be. 100 pages, finished.
Okay. So we're going to get into some more detail about all of that, because from our previous conversation in your lovely back garden in the sun, we went through in a lot of detail about all of your inspirations. But I'm just wondering, the synopsis of the play, the story of this particular piece of theatre, please, can you just give me a brief summary of that?
So we have 2 apartments on the same floor. Madame Colombe, her actual name, but I called her Madame Duval in the play, rescues this child. So we've got the family's apartment. In the story, the father is a dentist, and Madame Duval, in my story, works at the art museum where a lot of art was stolen. But it's all woven in together. And I felt that I couldn't tell the whole story without a brother, even though the little girl in question didn't have any siblings. And this brother becomes an absolute hero, because he then, in turns, all of the little bits of stories that I've accumulated that would make sense put together. Do you want a bit more?
Just a tiny little bit more, please. The narrative,
right,
as it were.
So it's everybody's starving. And it's absolutely imperative that food is found, because the coupons which they had really were useless. The queues were very long. But if you could get to a farm, if you could find a farm that nobody else had got to, was a chance of getting some food. And the brother sets off on a bike against all instructions. He goes off, I think I put him about 10 years old, 10 or 11, and he sets off to his cousin's farm, which is a long way away. It's a dangerous journey. When he gets to the farm, guess what? No food. But because they're family and because he's just a kid, he said, go down into the forest. There's a farm there. They will give you food. And then there are adventures. Bit more? And we
just for anybody who might not have seen the show.
Okay, so that's all the adventures there. He comes back and doesn't know. He has no idea that his parents have been arrested. Everybody who he knows is in the square, St. Paul, and it's mayhem. There are green and white buses. Everybody's being forced onto buses. And he just doesn't know what to do. and he hears a tap on the window. And the very kind neighbour, who's a nurse, taps and taps. And he realises he better turn round because of all this noise the taps had just heard. She brings him in. Together they watch the parents being taken onto the buses and disappear, leaving luggage, food, clothes, shoes, just forced into buses and everything left behind. A bit more?
That's okay. We can take it from my next question, which is, so you've already spoken a little bit about your inspiration behind it, but how did this as a play come about? You've said that it started as a poem, but what set you on the journey, and how did you come to decide for it to be a play? Because we've come to know a lot of Holocaust stories over the years, but what drew you to this particular one, and why did you want to tell this story?
Well, children have no voice in history unless somebody helps them to tell that story. That's one angle. And again, in some other research I'm doing at the moment, it's again children of the Holocaust. And the other aspects of it are the kindness of strangers. What happens to children who are displaced? What happens to refugees in general? I mean, there are many themes in the play that really can speak today, and have done so throughout history. And it's where people can find some kind of hope that they will thrive.
Yeah, it's definitely a story of hope in elements of it.
And that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And then it started to become a play.
So if you could take me through that journey a little bit, please, because I know you said it started out as a poem, but how for you does a poem become a play?
Well, by the time I'd put a few explanations in and started to illustrate it and then write it, it was hundreds of pages. And I asked a few people, first of all, what they thought of the story, which they liked, but it's a bit long to communicate. You know, it would have to be done in stages. So I thought, well, actually, when I looked at it, the way I'd written it, a lot of it was voices. Maybe this could work and translate into a play. So instead of having it all unjustified and all over the place, I left justified it. Oh, it's a bit of a play. So I worked on that, asked a lot of lovely people to share, and probably some of them might be listening now, to share by listening and reading and coming back with good feedback or bad feedback. And do you know what? A lot of it was really helpful. And by degrees, it went down and down and down till eventually it was about, when we performed it last July, which is significant because that was the 80th anniversary of this tragedy of 1942, this arrest, the Rafle. And this year, it's the 81st anniversary of the Rafle. So it just, seemed right. Anyway, by degrees, it got shorter and shorter. And in December, I'd cut it down an awful lot. And one of the fabulous young people who was reading it said, well, I'll try a little bit. And then he suddenly said, we're finished. It's not all that long. And that is where we've got to. But in the future, I hope to edit it down because I want to make it available free of charge to educational settings, people's settings. There's a good story to tell.
Yeah, amazing. And so coming back to this point of story, how did you decide which elements you wanted to include in this story? Because I know from our conversation, you said that it is, it's almost, I think what you said to me was that it's a semi-documentary in the sense that even though we're seeing it as a fictionalized theatre production, it is based on reality. So how do you choose what reality and what fiction you want to put together to tell this story in the way that you want to?
That was what I found hard. because there were so many elements. I mean, my desk and my bookcases are just burgeoning with notes and books and pictures and all kinds of videos. And I got to the point where, well, to simplify it, I imagined that we would leave Paris, set off for Switzerland or Spain or the coast or wherever we were hidden away. And that would be it. But it doesn't work out like that. So not only did I have to sort of prioritise, but I had to edit it to a point. And the one we did last summer was much longer. So I've edited edited a lot of it down. And I think the elements of the family, the broken family, the idea that the brother becomes so responsible, that the nurse, her story becomes so significant. I actually met somebody in France who very kindly sent me this documentary, which you can't get now. It's a 100-year-old doctor in Paris at the Jewish hospital. When she was a child, no, she was an intern nurse at the time, and she witnessed what was going on and how they helped to get the babies out of the hospital because they needed documents. And she stuck around and she became a doctor and worked there for a very long time. So there were all these elements, and it was a balance. I mean, I thought that going to the farm had to be done because it was the only way to get food. And not to imagine for a minute that the farmer wouldn't actually be Jewish and speak Yiddish.
That is a question I wanted to ask, actually, because when I watched it for the first time, I noticed this use of very specifically Ashkenazi, Yiddishy words, but also words and phrases and almost culture within it, which personally I hadn't paired with the narrative of French Jewry before. So how did that come to be about? I believe you have spoken to me about going to a conference in France.
I was in touch with OSE, or OSE it's called, and they were helpful during the war to the children. They originally came from Russia, and they put me in touch with this conference. And it was a survivors' second generation conference in Paris in wintertime. And decided to go. My French isn't very good, and my Yiddish should be a lot better. Both should be a lot better. Anyway, the thing that struck me straight away was everybody came up to me, all these lovely either survivors or the next generation came, Reid Yiddish, because they knew I didn't speak very good French, Reid Yiddish, and said, a bissel. And it still didn't quite hit me why they were all speaking Yiddish. Well, of course, the first group of Jews who were victimised were the ones who were obviously not true Frenchmen because they were speaking another language. So by speaking Yiddish, they were immediately under suspicion. I also found that a little unusual because I've met many French people who are Sephardi or Sephardim. And the Ashkenazi angle of all these people having come from so much persecution before they got to France, thinking this was not the Golden Medina, obviously, but a promise of good life. And it soon became very sour.
Which brings me to a point, actually, a particularly interesting piece of the show for me would, I think, be seemingly very small to a lot of people and wouldn't even necessarily notice it. But quite near the beginning, the characters are talking about not wanting to leave France and saying what good Frenchmen they are. And like I said, in the show, the characters are talking about it as if it's a positive thing. But to me, there's this sort of undercurrent of hostility that you've already mentioned, based on this sort of historical and contemporary accusation that Jewish people have a dual loyalty.
Oh, yes.
Which, as you said, comes a lot from language, if people didn't speak the language when they first got there. And I found that really interesting, considering France's history with its Jewish community, and in relation to, like, it might have seemed quite a long way between in the 1940s. But if you look at it in the grand scheme of time, the Dreyfus Affair and World War II weren't that far apart. So was it intentional to have your characters reference this precariousness of life as a Jewish person in France in a positive way?
Well, first of all, I believe it was Napoleon who had a very tolerant attitude to Jewish people. And then we have the Dreyfus case. And then there was World War I. So a lot of French people were in the army in the First World War. Many were decorated. And they saw that as the positive. So there's all the burden of what's gone before. But because if they hadn't gone, well, that's one of the pictures we might talk about. If they hadn't gone in the first opportunity, either to the south of France when Vichy divided the country into the north and the south, which was Vichy, if they hadn't escaped to the UK, America, Israel, well, Palestine as it was then, or Shanghai or anywhere else, they were stuck. But they still believed that they were true Frenchmen. True Frenchmen.
And it hit me that in that, it made it seem like they had this real faith and belief that France would protect them, which obviously as an audience member with hindsight, I'm going, okay, you're being to France, but France isn't going to be loyal to you in this particular scenario, which I find quite heartbreaking. And how did it feel for you writing that and putting that together?
I've often got very upset, I'm wondering what on earth I've written, and some of the situations, not just that, but some of the actual. Will come in the next one. We did it last July, when the mother saw the baby and then it was taken away. Things like that. It's very poignant. And my dad signed up to be in the army straight away. England had been good to our family. We were not the first generation, we were later. But it is a loyalty.
Yeah.
And a divided loyalty when you're thrown into these sort of situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's still very common today. And most people, whether it's from the Second World War or even coming into the contemporary era, have this sort of experience, particularly, like, I know that in the past I've been asked, well, are you a British Jew or are you a Jewish Brit? And it's a bit like, oh, can't I just be British?
And I wasn't going into issues like that. I was just trying to highlight the vulnerability of people who find themselves in some very awkward situations. And with hindsight and common sense, which you don't have in these panic situations.
No.
You think, well, everything's going to get better.
But that's what you said. There is this theme of hope throughout the piece.
I hope that comes across.
Which I know you've tried to show in a lot of different ways throughout it. But before we get to that, I just want to go back to these moments of catharsis in it. Because like we've discussed, it can be a very heavy subject. And I know that in our previous chat, you talked a lot about it being dry and heavy and you wanting to break it up or struggling to find ways to break it up. But there's two moments in particular that I thought brought a lot of catharsis to it, which was the non-Jewish lady who took the little girl in when she was working at the gallery and went to visit the gallery, and just sort of makes this passing comment of, I could hardly focus in the gallery. And please, could you just explain to me a little bit about your inspiration behind that line?
I'm fascinated. I love art. And when I saw the film, The Monuments Men, I thought this was a fantasy at first. And it isn't. It's real. So much material, arts, culture, anything they could lay their hands on was taken away by the Germans and dropped into lakes or hidden in homes or whatever it was. And I felt that there was something there that I wanted to bring in, like in the scene where the lady's hidden, also being hidden in the same flat as the apartment as the girl. And it says, somebody's given me, and the Chagall, they missed the Chagall, who was my inspiration for the art. And this was a picture that was rolled up in a sleeve for safekeeping. And I just find that this whole world was going on. I've just read a book all about the hidden artwork in France by the Louvre. And cat and mouse. There's a lot of cat and mouse in the story as well. And the cat and mouse situation with the artwork. And it sort of, how would you feel? How would you feel if you were working with the Germans around you, the German soldiers, packing stuff up that you hadn't already packed secretly, or French police, gendarmes, who were at times not too gentle or kind, not much difference or even worse. And I tried to bring some of that. I tried to find a depth to what these characters were. And I've just felt that might give a little dimension.
Yeah, it was really lovely because even though this is a story about the Jewish community within this area of Paris, that actually to acknowledge the regular life and day-to-day goings on of the non-Jewish character that's brought into it was a really lovely moment. And like I said, I think I thought of it as catharsis because it was focusing on this really, what's the word I'm looking for? Quite normal moment where she just stands there and almost, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but almost in a comedic way makes this comment of, I can't even focus on the artwork.
That's how you say it.
Yeah. But then that brings me to the other moment that I thought was particularly heartwarming in this really dark atmosphere. And it is with this same character. And obviously she's taken in the little girl. And in fact, I'll ask you to describe the moment, please, because I know we've talked about it. It is where she's brought in the little girl. It's the first night she's there, and it happens to be Friday night. So what is it that she does with this little girl? There's a song that I thought was really beautiful.
Right. So I go into a lot of schools and talking about Shabbat, Friday night, and preparing challah and the things that we do. And sometimes I teach them a song. And although there was this terror in the flat of making a noise, of disturbing the neighbours, they were not to know that there was an extra person in this flat. And little girls, little boys, they're not naturally quiet all the time. And here this little girl has to sleep under the table, a few cushions, and Madame Duval says, it's Friday night. We've got no food. There's no challah tonight. There's no Shabbos candles because there are no candles. the only thing we can do is sing. Shalom Aleichem. And I asked the whole cast to have a little sing at that point, because it was sort of such an echo.
And just for any of our audience members who might not know, what is Shalom Aleichem? What does it mean to you?
It's a welcome for the Sabbath. It's a song. Shalom means hello in this case. Hello to God, hello to everybody. And come in peace, basically. And it just happened, you know.
Yeah, it was, like I said, for me, it was really beautiful. It was this moment of, I think, where there was a really good balance of, again, bringing that humanity into this awful, large-scale atrocity, and bringing warmth and life and depth to both the little girl and actually to this woman who had taken her in.
Yes.
No questions asked. So on that point, let's move on a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of making a theatre production.
Okay.
So what made you decide to have it as a staged reading, as it were, versus a fully acted out piece of theatre?
I really would have liked it to be acted. I mean, I really made Madame Duval's secret thoughts so dramatic in the end. I think you might agree that when she was about to open the door, can I, can't I, should I, shouldn't I, what will I do? I can't, I can. I can. And the hand goes to the door. And those sort of moments, sorry, just bring it back to me again. Question.
That's all right. The decision to have it as a staged reading.
Right. So that was the drama that I was trying to pitch for, which would have really come out amazingly. But the age group I intended it for was a younger audience, and everybody was working at school or doing whatever they were doing. And I ended up with quite a disparate age group. And I just felt it was too much to expect them to learn the words. It wasn't happening. But it was a very comfortable situation on the stage. I mean, Rafi, the boy who was on the bike, he just about knew everything, and he didn't think he would. And he really came across, you know. He enjoyed it. I'm sorry, I'm going to tell a secret. He promised me that he'd be in it if I let him ride his bike.
We all have our price. If anybody wants
to, done it anyway, but
if anybody wants to hire me, I'll work for chocolate. And so, as well as it being a stage reading, you made the conscious decision to have a narrator.
Yes.
But you also mentioned that you intended the piece to be for a slightly younger audience. So
cast.
Cast,
the audience
sorry.
is any age. Yeah.
Apologies. So was there a specific reason you chose to have a narrator rather than, say, let the audience sort of work it out a little bit more?
It just happened. I just felt there was so much information that needed to be made quite clear. And because there wasn't that freedom to move, it just seemed to work. And he was wonderful. He got it together. He didn't falter, and it was up quite high up.
Yeah.
And he was brilliant.
And there was also, as well for me, with that brilliance, all of the actors, or there was certainly some of them at moments where there was elements of audience participation. So what was the thinking behind these moments of breaking the fourth wall, as it were, in theatre terms?
Audience participation. I love it. I think when you go to the theatre, there's no chance of nodding off if you have to actually do something. I can remember taking my children to the Playhouse Theatre when they'd started to do the really good panto sort of stuff, but it wasn't panto. And you had to stand up and sit down and do things, and that I loved.
Yeah. And
we didn't quite do that in this. It wasn't appropriate.
Well, it occurred to me that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there was an element of it where the intention was to bridge the past with the present. Because I know, is it one of the very first lines is talking about the audience here and now in Leeds, even though you're about to go on and tell this story from the past?
Well, that was my starting point, wasn't it? I love the words bureau de cabinet de bureau. No, what is it? Bureau de cabinet. And I always thought it's French. There must be some connection somehow. And if this is what you mean, how I decided to start in the modern day. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Starting in the modern day, everybody has some storage area of things that are precious. And in this story, I'm thinking that the generations, so the little girl and the little boy are similar ages to the children in the story. I couldn't develop that too much, not at this point, but they're playing and they find these pictures in the cupboard and it's locked. And they asked Maman, because it's the French background, if they could have a look at them. And I felt that was the link to say, these are the pictures. And the children drew them, and it's their observations of what they saw. So we're having a sort of zoom in.
Yeah. So actually, let's segue into then the pictures, because I want to talk about the artwork slightly separately, because it is almost a character within itself in the play. And I know that you're very passionate about the artwork as well. And as I'm sure you've all been able to tell from previous elements of this conversation, that Helen's very passionate about the artwork involved. So I believe we have some of the pictures to show everybody. So if we can get up the first one, please, which is the Bureau de Cabinet.
Right, so we're just talking about the Bureau de Cabinet. Basically, as I said, most people have a cupboard or a cabinet somewhere of special, even a shoebox of special stuff. And I just felt that if the children could see something in the cupboard that would connect them with a question about their heritage, then that could be something that would be a starting point to the story. And Mum decides that, yes, it's time to open the cupboard and share the images. And that tells the story.
Yeah. And so, as well as you writing this piece, you also directed it.
Yes.
So I'm wondering about the directorial choice of having these images be drawings versus, say, photographs.
Well, there are a couple of photographs. I don't know if they came in this version of the play. I have to thank Monsieur Google. Monsieur Google and I, on a hot summer's day, thought Monsieur COVID might allow me to do some sketching in the garden. I had an easel. I was walking out one day and I saw somebody dismantling a kitchen cupboard packaging. I borrowed it, painted on it. It was absolutely awful. I turned it upside down and it became something reasonable. Aha! The first picture was the cat, which we won't show today, but that was sent to a children's hospital during COVID. And I thought, do you know what? Monsieur COVID and everybody else, all these ideas in my head, I can't do staging, I'll do drawing. And found that I could perhaps in some way, because it's not my thing, I admire other people who do it. And I hope people like it.
Yeah, I noticed as the show progressed that I was understanding the style of it more and the reasoning of it more. And because obviously you're telling the story almost from the perspective of the children. And also artists that you've mentioned already, Monsieur Marc Chagall,
Yes.
who was a very big part of what was going on at this particular point in France. And I also referenced, correct me if I'm wrong, a cheeky reference to Salvador Dali with a melting clock.
Yes.
So I was just wondering if you can please just explain to us a little bit more about the artistic influences that you had in...
Are we going to look at the cover?
Yeah, if we can please, it's image number 3, please, which is the cover to the show.
Yeah. So I felt that perhaps looking at Jewish artists and other artists of the period might guide me to some themes or styles. And I looked at Chagall's Through the Window 1913. And it looked like it could have been a French square. And in the distance, there was a hot air balloon, a French-style decorated hot air balloon. I thought, now that could not be in my picture. But the idea was that there would be a drone watching 360 degrees of this square, of the Place. And so I removed that, and I felt that the way Chagall had done the faces of Papa and the cat really expressed the stress and anxiety that was going on as the buses arrived in the square. So that was what I translated into that. Then I felt it needed a frame. And I thought about a pomegranate, because in Hebrew, a rimon is a pomegranate, which is an explosive item. And the situation was very explosive. So at the top, you might detect just some little points which over time have eroded away with other parts of the design. So that's actually at New Year we have pomegranates, and thinking of that for New Hope.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot to the pomegranate in both Jewish culture and various sort of Arab and Mediterranean cultures as a whole. I don't know if you know about the theories behind the number of seeds in a pomegranate.
613.
Yeah, which is supposedly there are 613 seeds inside a pomegranate. I only know one person who's actually counted, and I don't believe that was the number.
The number can vary, just like anything else.
But it's to do with the 613 mitzvot, which are the good deeds that Jewish people are supposed to carry out in their daily lives. But then there's also these themes of fertility and fruitfulness and new life that come along with a pomegranate, as well as the way that people could see a pomegranate as also being like a grenade.
Yeah. And that was the explosive situation.
Yeah.
In the square. And then another theme of the roundness was also an apple, which is, again, a symbolic food of the new year and new hope. But then in the first play, there was the theme of this lady who was in labour crowded onto the bus. And she ends up at the Jewish hospital, having been in the Veldiv, the winter cycling centre, which became a prison. And I felt that the womb also, the round shape of the womb, reflected itself in there, and the new hope for the baby, which came later. And all the while, the River Seine is dawdling along round Paris, unable to do anything.
And so I'd like to just move on to, I'm afraid looking at time, we're not going to be able to get through all of the images. you've sent me. But if we could go to image number 4, please, which is Maman crying. If you could just tell me a little bit about that one, because I believe that there is a lot of inspiration from the art world of the time came into that one.
Matisse actually wasn't Jewish, but he had a lot of Jewish supporters, Gertrude Stein, and many others. And first of all, there was a thing where Maman left the house but under arrest, and she said, French lady must always put on her hat. And a lot of his ladies wore hats. Mm-hmm. And then the colours in the faces. So yes, there are various cross-references to Dali and other people, but that one it was the colours as much as the anguish, distorted fauvism and all the rest of it in the face. Yeah.
Yeah. And then one that I think actually matches quite nicely with that and gives another side to the story, which again goes with your theme of atrocity and hope happening at the same time, is image number 6, which is Maman et Papa.
I love that. I don't know if any of you do a lot of artwork, but for me, it's been such an exploration. So it started off quite simply of the Eiffel Tower with this sort of distorted face and Maman and Papa flying away, as in many of Chagall's paintings. And I think it could be called The Bride, I'm not sure, but there's so many elements to it. And it started off with quite a dull background, and I thought, well, that's no good. So I've gone back to it many times, and actually I've discovered that you can do a lot of stuff on the computer as well, which is a quick way of, and a thoughtful way of adding depth. And it's ended up as a nighttime background, but the mother and father, Maman and Papa, are flying, and the Eiffel Tower, his expression. And white boots.
And obviously, please, can you just explain to everybody, because if they haven't seen the show yet, which maybe if they haven't, you'll be coming to the screening on Wednesday, but what is happening on stage while this image of Maman et Papa is being shown?
So our little girl is under the tablecloth, can't sleep, dozes a bit, can't sleep, dozes a bit. And so we're in her head at this point, and she is having this visualization of her parents, come back. It's all my fault, isn't it? I can hear the little girl in the play. It's all my fault. Come back. I didn't mean to do it. It's that sort of thing.
Yeah, which is really, I think, again, I'd really like to hear a little bit more about it, is weaving in all these layers of depth of subconsciously or consciously giving us as an audience historical context. Because at the time, for anybody who doesn't know, the artist Marc Chagall, who the image is inspired by, was living in Vichy, France, also known as Free France, down in the south at this point, and waited as long as he possibly could, literally until the last second, to flee France, and was aided by the Americans. And so to have that then in this moment where she's been rescued by this woman, and then to also know that that we know now in the future, Marc Chagall's work would end up being these images of hope. For example, his stained glass windows in the Israeli Knesset, the parliament building. So was it a conscious decision to specifically use and reference Marc Chagall for these reasons?
Absolutely. But it just spoke to me. It's a feeling, you know.
Yeah.
Looking at art books or on computers, I went to an art exhibition of his work, two actually. It's just, some things speak to you. and understanding the history that went behind it. I believe he actually went into Paris before he left. It's always the backstory that's interesting.
Yeah.
Just looking at pictures doesn't teach you. Well, some people like looking at pictures, but some people like to know what it was that happened.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, the last picture I'd like to talk about, which we actually don't have an image of, is that so throughout the show, all of your pictures, for the most part, have been drawings, but then you finish it on a photograph. And you're able to just tell everybody, please, what that photograph is.
I might have a picture of it.
Oh, if you've got, yeah.
Can you?
I'll reach up and grab it.
The reason why I've got this photo, well, I nearly didn't, I shouldn't really have had this photograph, and I do apologise to the powers that be. I think it's in here. Oh no, this one hasn't got it. No, I haven't got it.
That's okay. They can watch the recording or come and watch the play.
Yes, come and watch the play. The really big drama was when the boy went back to the farm the second time, rather blasé maybe. There was a curfew at 5 o'clock. It was raining as he came back laden with food, mushrooms in his little beret from the farmer. And he skidded. And the policeman just didn't care for little boys being out before the curfew on a bike, laden with food. And he was arrested and ended up in a green and white bus, just like his parents, round and round Paris, no food, no water. And they end up at the Vel d'Hiv.
And so for anybody who doesn't know, what is the Vel d'Hiv?
The Vel d'Hiv was the winter sport cycle centre, a bit like the one you see in the Olympics going round and indoors. But this was the worst kind of prison. And on the levels above, and I really didn't know what it looked like. I'd only read many things about it. And there were just levels and levels, and everybody, wheelchairs strewn around, no toilets, no food, no water, and the sky was the ceiling was sort of a greenish haze. The whole place looked like awful. And I actually saw a documentary, and I'm going to be cheeky and take a photograph. Sorry. I could draw it. Now I've seen it, but it was a bit late at that point, and I thought, well, maybe a photograph would work. But it really, really was the worst kind of hole, and you couldn't get out of it. It was impossible to get out. And I believe only a handful, if that, of people got out. So in reality, the story that I've read, if you've got time for a quick...
we are running short. If we want to be able to answer some audience questions.
One quick thing. A little girl was told by her mother, get out now and tell everybody. And the girl couldn't cope. But somehow she got to the door, through the crowds of people, and they said, where are you going? She said, I'm not Jewish. And felt terrible. But she got out. And I used that as a story for the thing.
Yeah. And so this last photo, which is a picture of the crowded velodrome, really, I think, signifies this drawback to reality for the audience. We've been in this world of theatre for the whole show, and now we've got a real, what we can objectively see as a real image. And so what was my last question? What was your inspiration for having that as the final image of the show? There was so much more that I've cut out, but I felt that was a very dramatic point, and the story can continue with the next. Amazing. Thank you so much. And I know that maybe some of our audience will have asked this question. But there are thoughts of developing this piece further, and you've mentioned it throughout as well. So maybe we will see another version of it with...
Can I just add that I met not a survivor, I met one of the resistance who we haven't talked about. He was 107 years old in Paris, and he was a cousin of Marcel Marceau.
Okay. So before I wrap everything up, we've got a very small amount of time left. And I know that the wonderful Alan Benstock is over at the computer looking at your questions over on Zoom. So Alan, do we have any questions for Helen?
Right. I'll do the reverse order. For the first one from David Port is, good evening, Helen. Congratulations on writing such a fine and worthy play about this very harrowing event, so as to keep alive the memory of it and the poor souls who were rounded up. It can't have been easy. I feel very honoured to have performed in it. Is it known how many Jews, both children and adults, were hidden by the French, and how many of those hidden managed to escape the Nazis?
I believe there will be statistics, but I can only add that when I was in Israel, the opposite side, when I was in Israel, we discovered a huge memorial of 80,000 names of people who didn't make it. But there were quite a lot who did survive. I think there is a statistic somewhere. Thank you.
If I may add, only 10 days ago, I was in a village in France called Dieu Lafitte, which is actually named by Yad Vashem as righteous, because this was in the high mountains of Provence, and they 10,000 were sheltered there, and there were 10 residents were named as righteous by Yad Vashem for the work they did.
We haven't talked about the righteous, but anybody who helped anybody, mostly non-Jewish people, are recorded at Yad Vashem in the most amazing woodland side. It's so moving, and in forests in all different ways, and personal things in France, and blue kind of plaques in France where you just don't expect them.
Josephine Jackson just sent her best, but wonderful to see you after all this time. Well done, how amazing. Just to say, she's still involved in Holocaust education, and she's now in Bournemouth. Yvonne Cheney, who I know is in Southern California, is our regular viewer, or one of the many overseas. This programme has been a great expose of how the Jews in Paris were rounded up in the square and how most thought they would be okay as being French. Is the play being recorded for us out-of-country people to see? Can it be seen in the United States? Well, there's Georgina's going to explain what's happening on Wednesday, and then I will come back on that. Okay, so if you explain what's going to happen on Wednesday, Georgina.
So on Wednesday in Leeds, there is going to be an opportunity to rewatch and revisit this last year's staging of the show. It is being shown at UHC, Shadwell Lane Synagogue, at 8:15 this coming Wednesday. To book your tickets to attend, you just need to go to the Milim website, which is milim.org.uk. And there, that doesn't really answer your question about the states, but I think Alan might be able to answer that one better. But for anybody in Leeds or who would be willing to travel to Leeds, then you can come see it with our lovely Helen introducing it at UHC.
Is Alan mentioning about Lawrence?
Yes.
Yes.
Got it. It is the recording of the film. It's not a live performance. But what is significant, and this is why we've decided to do this, and it's at Helen's inspiration, is that it's in memory of the late Lawrence Gosden, of blessed memory, who died only just a couple of days before Pesach, who played an integral part in the play. So we've done that in memory of him. There's opportunities to give donations in Lawrence's memory to the Bexley Wing, because in support of cancer research. And then what we'll do is the recording we will make available on the Milim website at the end of it'll take a bit of tech to do it, but it'll be up, and I'll put a note up in the newsletter. So yes, anyone who isn't able to come, we can put it up. We'll put it up then.
Thank you.
And there will be an opportunity to donate again to the Bexley Wing on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you. Right,
Is that it?
Do we? I was going to say, do we have
could I say thank you to Milim?
Yeah. We ought to also mention, because it will go, this recording, that it wasn't without the support of Arts Leeds Inspired that's enabled it to talk. They do support quite a lot of work of Milim now, but this particular project was separately funded, and we've got to thank them as well. But yes, there's no other questions in the Q&A or on the chat.
I can't say anything else.
Sorry, you can say what you want now.
It's finished.
I've got one, not a question, but one thing, because I know that...
Recording still? We are.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought we were just casual. So one last thing, with all of this in mind, I know that there are a couple of audience members today who are very special to you, and whose personal history ties in with the story that your play tells. And I know you want to say a little something to them.
Watching today, I believe, from New York, Phyllis and Andrew, it's their first wedding anniversary today. So happy anniversary. But why particularly? Because Andrew's mum came from Germany and ended up staying for many years with Tony's family, which kept her safe and welcome. But his uncle was a hidden child in one of the chateaux in France for a period. And I will be looking at this chateau in particular. There's a lot of information about it in my next research. So thank you for coming, to everybody from far and wide. Thank you to Milim, and thank you to Leeds Inspired, and thank you to the wonderful premises, and to you, thank you for being so lovely.
And our final thank you to Helen for all your wonderful work and for sitting down and talking to us today.
Thank you.
And remember, if you want to come and see the showing of the play on Wednesday, please visit milim.org.uk. Thanks, everyone.